Hello, welcome back. Um, we're still live. It. Oh yeah, no, the stream on YouTube is gone. Um, yeah. uh, stream stream did break during the ad break, which is like my session restarted. Uh, are people still here? um, okay, well that's fine. YouTube stream is like sort of secondary anyway. Um, unless it. Okay, I kind of have to. I don't totally care actually. I'm just gonna close YouTube and. Okay, we're still here. We're still talking about this, and we will have uh a recording of Face Your Fears reading this poem, which is kind of fun. Um, excuse the heavy German accent, but it should suffice. Yeah, it's always interesting to get the poet's interpretation of the poem itself. So I guess we'll start back off with you just reading this, and maybe I can we can have some thoughts on how it changed and what's interesting about that. So here it is.
I'm sorry I'm butchering this.
Oh, it's quiet.
Life is naught but a game of chance, akin to the cast of a die, once thrown, one ought to die. Despite its eyes, it was unable to see, whereas the ending, it has always been foreseen. He who once was, shall some day be no more. There was no tally, no one kept score. Eternal silence was the final encore. All shared a fate to fate. Choice there was none. Foregone was the conclusion. Creation's due, one ought to recall, was, thereafter, the hereafter. Loss or gain, equal to blind die, O death reaped the vine beloved and hated alike. Destiny claimed and maimed, called and mauled, bereaved and retrieved. Neither purpose nor calling was of consequential matter, be they hero, villain, or passerby. Some day those had, unwillingly, come to, and some day those would, inadvertently, come to, perish. Such tragedy prewritten, such barbarism directed, such is life. The tale of being was one of infinite possibilities, but with solely one direction to take. It was so and would be so. Different beginnings marked the same definitive ending. An actor's visage remained interchangeable. The curtain call, the callous claim, that did not differentiate amidst the parts played. The circle of life was nothing more than a direct pathway towards oblivion. As such, death was not the game of chance, akin to the cast of a loaded die, once thrown. Answer, someone had to answer. It was clear for everyone to see. Don't you see the endings foreseen? He who just is was soon to be no more. So I ask you, what is it for?
Bam. That's you reading it. That goes hard. Um, I really like super dug your cadence on this uh had unwillingly come to, and someday those would inadvertently come to perish. Right? Like I think that was like obviously you're gonna read your poem better than I read your poem. But I super dig it, and I think you definitely probably read it with a better flow than I do, but maybe that's because I'm reading it off the page and you're reading based on, you know, your own emotions and feelings as it relates to it, right? Um, Nikki, I could hear some pauses that enjambment would have added and forced the reader to also take that breath. Yeah, and that's a way we can think about enjambment is like where we read our own poem out loud and then notice where we pause, notice where we interpret our own poem uh, from a like a natural perspective, and then try to reflect that on the page. Maybe we can like listen to it again, and I can like go through and try to point
I'm
out those
sorry I'm
moments.
butchering this. Life is naught but a game of chance, akin to the cast of a die. Once thrown, one ought to die. Despite its
There's a
eyes,
breath
it was
there.
unable to see, whereas the ending, it has always been foreseen. He who once was, shall someday be no more.
Like
There
right
was no telling,
there,
no one
right
kept score.
there, we go pretty straight through he who once was, pause, shall someday be no more. Like if I can recreate that cadence, right? Um, Whereas the ending, it has always been foreseen. He who once was shall someday be no more. And what we are communicating there, what you communicate there in reading Face My Fear, is a longer pause here and a shorter pause here. And maybe that means like this is a better place for enjambment, right? Because like based on the page acts as sort of instructions on how to read the poem. And I think this is why punctuation can be valuable. We also have some people in our community who write and say, I don't like punctuation because I want the reader to be able to read it however is natural for them. That's a cool thing too. But like periods tell us something different than dashes, tell us something different than commas, tell us something different than line breaks. And I think line breaks can almost be considered a form of punctuation in poetry where they act maybe like a period, maybe like a comma. Depends on the length of the lines around it, depends on the context. But there maybe are like most important tool of punctuation where even if we have a poem that's completely unpunctuated, and I read a lot of punctuation light poetry, just controlling where the line break is can give the reader enough of an idea of pacing where you don't need any other punctuation. And that to me means like the line break is one of the most important tools of punctuation that we have as poets. Um, so maybe we can keep listening. I mean, maybe that's enough to illustrate the idea, right, of where we've placed those breaks within that reading. Maybe we'll do just like a couple more lines of it. I don't think we're gonna listen to the whole thing again. Boom.
Eternal silence was the final encore. All shared a fate to fate. Choice there was none. Forgone was the conclusion. Creation's due, one ought to
Breath
recall,
there, but not too
was,
much weight.
thereafter, the hereafter. Loss or gain, equal to blind die, O death reaped the vine beloved and hated alike. Destiny claimed and maimed, called and mauled, bereaved and retrieved. Neither purpose nor calling was of consequential matter, either hero, villain, or passerby. Some day those had, unwillingly, come to, and some day those would, inadvertently, come to, perish. Such tragedy prevailed.
Yeah, so that part's interesting. Someday, or it was like someday those had unwillingly come to. Someday those would inadvertently come to perish. And we also have like commas here, would inadvertently, and I think that contributes to like what you said. But we also lack those same commas here and here. Maybe that's just a little uh, editing choice. Because you read these pretty much identically. And I think if you want them by your reader to be read identically, there's a value in presenting them in terms of punctuation identically, right? That certainly makes sense. Uh and like, again in this line, like we pretty much charge through beloved and hated alike. And I think maybe it's just because you're more of a prose person that you read to the end of the sentence. Uh, Poetry especially free verse, I tend to automatically, like, personally lean into line break is breath break. And I think that's something to maybe note as someone going from prose to poetry, right? Is prose, is about the sentence and the paragraph, and these are the way that pacing happens, right? Whereas in poetry, the big point of pacing is not the sentence, it's the line, because the line is often shorter than the sentence. And that's even something I said at the very beginning of reading this, was like, oh, this is a surprise. We have like multiple sentences within a line. That's like an unfamiliar thing. And that definitely was a sort of like baffling thing from the poetry perspective that really like changed how I read this as opposed to like how you read this. And maybe that's a general just piece of advice for the prose writer, just in terms of anyone who is wanting to write poetry, is that the shift is maybe one of a thought of sentences and paragraphs to a shift of lines and stanzas, and that these things fundamentally in poetry are treated differently, like commonly, than sentences and paragraphs. That's not to say that we can't write poetic line and poetic stanza that blends these ideas. There's certainly value in that, but it's something that's important to note, right? Something interesting. Yeah. That I think hearing you read it probably gave us some interesting, helpful, beneficial, novel thoughts. So I appreciate that. And I think maybe just in general, I would like maybe should be more encouraging of people doing that on stream, is sending a little clip of them reading or performing the poem. Because last stream we had FJ who sent their recording, 2 recordings of their work, and I think that was a very beneficial thing to like how we analyze that poem, right? So, maybe that's something people can consider going forward. But yeah, I don't think I necessarily feel a need to read this whole thing again, since we just had it read through by you. Maybe I'll read it again. I always read the whole thing to cap it off. So if there are no other thoughts, no other questions, then I'll read it again, and that'll be the thing. Thanks for the analysis, though. I appreciate it. I appreciate you sending your work, face your fear. The whole, reading people's stuff doesn't happen without people's stuff to read. And it was very enjoyable. And I appreciate you. Here's Life is Not But a Game of Chance. Life is not but a game of chance, akin to the cast of a die. Once thrown, one ought to die. Despite its eyes, it was unable to see, whereas the ending... I'm like, at my stuff. Whereas the ending, it has always been foreseen. He who once was shall someday be no more. And there was no tally. No one kept score. Eternal silence was the final encore. All shared a fate to fade. Choice there was none. Foregone was the conclusion. Creation's due, one ought to recall, was thereafter the hereafter. Loss or gain? equal to blind die, O death reaped thine beloved and hated alike. Destiny claimed and maimed, called and mauled, bereaved and retrieved. Neither purpose nor calling was of consequential matter. Be they hero, villain, or... Guys, the analysis sometimes makes it difficult for me to read my own stuff. Passerby, someday those had but passerby, someday those had unwillingly come to, and someday those would inadvertently come to perish. Such tragedy pre-written, such barbarism directed, such is life. The tale of being was one of infinite possibilities, but with solely one direction to take. It was so and would be so. Different beginnings marked the same definitive ending. An actor's visage remained interchangeable. The curtain call, the callous claim, that did not differentiate amidst the parts played. The circle of life was nothing more than a direct pathway towards oblivion. As such... Death was not the game of chance, akin to the cast of a loaded die, once thrown. Answer. Someone had to answer. It was clear for everyone to see. Don't you see? The ending is foreseen. He, who just is, was soon to be no more. So I ask you, what is it for? Life is not but a game of chance. By Face Your Fear. Thank you for sending it. Wonderful. I appreciate it. I do agree, Nikki, that Face My Fears reading definitely helped. And this was fun. Yeah. That's life is not but a game of chance. Yeah. Was an interesting discussion that arose from its layout. Yeah. Sometimes just the way things are presented and sent is enough to like cause, unexpected conversations, thoughts, that kind of stuff. So yeah. And that's all the poem for today. We're just doing one. And I pretty much have to bounce. But thank you all for tuning in to this slightly short stream. We will be back on Saturday. Saturday will be a day of reading a classic poem, and I've gotten, it looks like, a whole bunch of recommendations from people for different classic poems to read. So I'll choose one or two of them, probably just one. We'll do like a really big in-depth analysis, I think, is what I would prefer to do with those streams. So yeah, Saturday at noon Pacific time, same time as this stream started, for discussion of maybe Baudelaire, maybe George Trakl, maybe Shel Silverstein, maybe someone else. I don't know. We'll see. But until then, yeah, thanks for the thoughts, Nikki and Reclusi. Thanks for the poetry, Face Your Fear. Thanks everyone who was lurking, if any. Y'all are dope too. And that's it. It feels so short. I guess I've got places to be. Thank you all so much for watching. Keep making art you love. Bye.